Ethics and Worldview by Tammy Malone Wallace for Education 633 Principles of Design and Management in Educational Technology. I'd like to begin by talking about a particular topic we've talked a lot about, and that is instructional design and when it comes to universal design for learning. The reason I picked this one to really talk about is because of the scripture listed in the top right. In Exodus 4:11, Scripture states, "Then the Lord said to him, Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord?" So when we go to design anything, we have an ethical responsibility to make sure that we include all, that we include learning for everyone. As Rayo states in 2021, universal design for learning is a framework that can guide the development of inclusive learning environments. The UDL guidelines used as a part of an instructional design process provide a structure to proactively design flexible pathways, and provide options that can support all learners. UDL uses three principles for design: representation, action, and expression and engagement. Now, if you look over on the right, there were some statistics that were provided, both a part of the coursework and also of some other statistics that support making sure that we do include all learners because, as stated by Sherratt in 2017, there are 10 million people in the world that are either blind or have visual impairments. 15% of the world's population, that's the entire world, lives with a physical sensory of deafness or blindness, intellectual or mental health impairment significant enough to affect their daily lives, as listed by Gross 2018. And of the approximately 93 million children with moderate or severe disabilities around the world, large numbers do not have access to quality education, as stated by Bose and Hyman in 2020. We have an ethical responsibility to make sure that what we do design in instructional design is applicable for all. But when we do these inclusive designs, when we do instructional design, we want to make sure that our efforts are inclusive, because as stated by Sherratt in 2017, in the talk that we watched, there's some consequences that if we don't. And several of these that I'm going to go through, it can be physical harm, emotional harm, exclusion, or injustice. So the first one I wanted to look at is Canvas, because Canvas is used quite largely in both the higher education facilities and in a K-12 environment. So the National Equity Project states equity. Educational equity means that each student receives what he or she needs to develop to their full academic and social potential. So if we take that into our ethic compass, then we need to make sure that we're talking about Canvas. When we went to remote learning, many platforms were used, not just Canvas, but when we go to design the content, as stated by Emerson College IT Help, an accessible course provides all students the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services with substantially equivalent ease of use. Canvas as a platform is 508 compliant with homogeneous color schemes, clean designs, and tab navigable menus. However, it is up to you to ensure that the content you create using Canvas is accessible. Here are the best ways to do so. And this is really important, the however it's up to you. Canvas does have an accessibility checker, but if you don't use it, which in some of the research it states many professors do not before they actually post the content. It states structure your textual content with header tags and lists. Add alternative text to images. Use descriptive links. Make accessible color choices. Use captioned videos. and use accessible documents, as we're seeing in Chronicles 25:7-9. And the responsibility of the educator is they cast lots for their duties, small and great, teacher and pupil alike. Just as a student has a duty, so does the teacher, and both are great vessels for the kingdom. So we really want to pay attention to how are we designing the course, because we have an ethical responsibility to not cause any harm to the one who's trying to access the content for learning. As I looked at the ISTE website, there were some things that I felt like, and this was listed actually on the very front page as a link to this article that was posted June 8, 2022, and it talked about TikTok usage. And as I read further into the article, it even expressed at early ages. Well, students are not supposed to be on TikTok at the below the age of 13. And I understand the use of video in the classroom, but exposure to TikTok could lead to a child wanting to use the video platform. And many videos are inappropriate because we also see that many videos go viral, and it's a lure to the child to want to be TikTok famous or to be viral. And if we expose at too young of an age where the frontal cortex is not mature enough, we're really leading a child down the wrong path. And we want to be careful of using anything that could do that type of damage to a child. As I'm looking on the front website of looking on the ISTE front page, I'm drawn to where it says LGBTQ resources for educators. Well, yes, I understand that's a movement in the world, but coming from a biblical worldview and not a secular worldview, talking about LGBTQ and the use of pronouns and the use of pronouns in literature, in course materials, in the way that we design a course. And we have scripture that tells us this is not of a biblical worldview. As we see in Leviticus 18:22 through 24, we see scripture that talks to us about how LGBTQ is not in cohesiveness with a biblical worldview. But if you look on the right side of this image, something very good is there, and that's teach students about Juneteenth. Juneteenth, of course, is the equity for all races and the abolishment of slavery. And this is something we would definitely want to use and have those technological resources to use in the classroom. As stated in Exodus 3:7-9, then the Lord said, I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on their account of the taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings. So we see that this section of the ISTE website does line up with a biblical worldview in talking about Juneteenth. But we also know ISTE is not a biblical website. It is a secular website. So we must be aware of the resources that we use even as educators. But there are other items that we really do need to take into consideration when we're doing and looking and performing with a biblical worldview. Computer use, not turning our backs in the classroom and when a child is on a computer, ensuring their safety so we're not causing any type of emotional harm. Use of student learning management systems such as privacy and copyright, that we are aware of these when we use the materials. Use of YouTube, again, being lured into the video sensory of wanting to be viral, that when we do expose children to YouTube, and there are so many great resources out on YouTube, that we are cognizant and aware of our responsibility as educators to talk about the safety and internet safety of using these types of systems. And creation of online student accounts, which, according to the Children's Online Protection Policy Act and privacy, a child is not supposed to be under the age of 13 in certain platforms. And when we do, we take on that ownership of having that censorship in making sure that our students are indeed kept safe when we use these platforms that we choose for student accounts. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about classroom design. And when you walk into a classroom, just within itself, it is an instructional design to begin with. And when you go and you begin your instructional design of your classroom, I believe you should be looking to the ADDIE model, doing that assessment, and developing and designing your classroom that it is implementing what's best practices of instructional design may look like. I particularly love flexible seating. My classroom is designed for flexible seating because of what I feel is my ethical and moral decision to go and make my classroom differentiated just as much as my teaching. And as you see in stated by research in 2017, we found that differentiated teaching for personalized learning is neither possible nor effective in traditional classrooms and needs to be accompanied by differentiated spaces. And it again, it is my philosophy, it is my belief as um, as an educator with 28 years of experience that instructional design doesn't just begin with or inclusive of a lesson, it's also inclusive of the environment. And that environment, whether it's physical or virtual, must be inclusive. We have an ethical responsibility to make sure even the beginning of a start of instructional design, virtually or physically, is inclusive. You'll see here are the references that were used throughout this presentation, and I appreciate your time in listening and walking through with me ethical and ethics and worldview and instructional design.